A whisper moves through the leaves of an ancient forest. Have you ever stood beneath an old tree and felt a silent, watching presence? That subtle sensation is an echo from the world of Greek mythology, a hint of the Dryads, the enigmatic spirits who live within the trees themselves. By the end of this journey, you will understand the profound bond between these nymphs and their trees, a connection that held the power of life and death. We will uncover why harming a single oak could bring a terrible curse and explore the tragic fate of a nymph who turned into a tree to escape a god. What does the natural world try to tell us when we stop to listen? Yet the term dryad itself holds a deeper meaning in its very syllables. The name comes directly from the ancient Greek word for oak tree, drus. This single, powerful root reveals their most fundamental nature. They are not vague forest ghosts or free-roaming nature spirits. A dryad is a nymph, a lesser goddess of the natural world, who is born bonded to a specific, individual tree. Her life force and her consciousness are woven into the bark and the roots. Her existence is a singular, sacred partnership. Think of it not as a spirit living in a tree like a tenant in a house, but as the soul of the tree itself given a voice, a form, and a name. This is why the fate of the dryad and her tree are one and the same. If the tree thrives, she flourishes. If the tree is wounded, she feels the cut. And if the tree is ever destroyed, her life ends with it. This absolute physical bond transforms every grove from a simple collection of trees into a living community of ancient, sentient beings. This bond is both a profound blessing and a potential curse. A dryad does not simply live in her tree. She is the consciousness of the wood, the sentience of the sap, the voice of the rustling leaves. Think of a single, vibrant soul expressing itself through two bodies at once. One is a stationary, physical form of bark and branches, while the other is a mobile, graceful nymph who can dance in the shade of her own canopy. They are not two beings sharing a life, but one life expressing itself in two beautiful, interconnected ways. When the summer sun is warm and the roots drink deeply from the soil, the dryad feels that nourishment as a surge of vitality and joy. She might manifest more fully, her laughter echoing where the wind touches the highest boughs. But this deep connection means that any injury to the tree is a personal, visceral wound. A woodsman's axe biting into the trunk is not just damage to wood. It is a scream of agony felt by the spirit within. A deep gash in the bark is a bleeding scar on the dryad's own essence. The central, heartbreaking tragedy of their existence is this shared fate. If the tree is ever felled, burned, or succumbs to a blight, the dryad does not simply become homeless. Her life is extinguished along with it. She cannot move to another tree, cannot be transplanted or saved. The death of the oak is the death of the nymph. This is why in the oldest Greek tales, harming a tree without proper reverence was considered a terrible, dangerous act. You were not merely cutting down a plant, you were committing an act of destruction against a divine, conscious life. The sorrow of a dying dryad was said to linger in a clearing for generations, a silent, mournful presence where life was severed at its root. How different would our relationship with the ancient forests be if we saw every tree not as an object, but as the home of a living soul? Within this sacred bond, a profound division exists among the dryads themselves. While many nymphs could wander the forests, their lives tethered to, but not imprisoned by their trees, one group embodied the ultimate expression of this connection. These were the Hamadryads. The name itself tells you everything, for it means together with the tree. A Hamadryad is not merely bonded to her oak or her poplar. She is so completely one with it that their physical forms are inseparable. She cannot stray from its roots, not even for a moment. Her entire world is the shade beneath its branches, the feel of its bark beneath her hand, the whisper of its leaves in her ears. This is the most intimate and the most perilous form of existence for a tree spirit, while other Dryads might experience their tree as a home they are deeply connected to. For the Hamadryad, the tree is her body. Her spirit is the life circulating within the sapwood, and her consciousness is the slow, patient awareness of the growing rings. This absolute unity makes her story the most poignant and often the most tragic in all the myths. The fate of the tree is not just linked to her life, it is her life. There is no escape, no second chance, no moving on. When an axe falls, it does not just end a tree. It executes a goddess. The story of a Hamadryad is therefore a story of rootedness in its most literal and terrifying form. Her power is immense within her own domain, for she is the very essence of that single living organism, but her vulnerability is absolute. Her entire destiny is tied to the fate of one stationary being in a world of constant change and danger. This is why the ancient Greeks regarded certain ancient, towering trees with such awe and fear. They knew they were not just looking at a plant. They were standing in the physical presence of a Hamadryad, a spirit for whom that tree was both a kingdom and a prison, a body and a tomb. To harm such a tree was not merely a crime. It was a kind of deicide, the murder of a divine being trapped in plain sight. To truly grasp the unique nature of the Dryads, we must see them within the grand family of nymphs. These lesser goddesses were the vibrant life force of the world itself, each type bound to a different element of the wild landscape. The Oreads, for instance, were the spirits of the mountains and cliffs. Imagine their essence as fluid as the mountain mist, their voices echoing in the high, lonely passes. They were free to roam their vast, stony domains, their existence tied to the entire mountain range, rather than a single, fragile stone. Similarly, the Naiads presided over the fresh, moving waters. They were the consciousness of a babbling brook, a quiet spring, or a rushing river. A Naiad's life was linked to her water source, but her domain was a flowing, dynamic one. If a river changed its course over centuries, the Naiad could move with it. Her spirit was as adaptable and shifting as the water she embodied. Now, place the Dryad beside her cousins. Her existence is defined by a profound and radical fixity. An Oread can traverse her entire mountain. A Naiad can follow her river to the sea. But a Dryad, especially a Hamadryad, is forever rooted to one spot. Her world is measured in the circumference of her tree's shadow at noon. This is not a hierarchy of power, but a hierarchy of connection. The Dryad possesses the most intimate, personal, and therefore most vulnerable bond of all. While an Oread is the soul of an entire mountain, and a Naiad the soul of a flowing stream, a Dryad is not the soul of the entire forest. She is the singular, irreplaceable soul of one single tree. This distinction transforms the ancient woods from a general sacred space into a collection of countless individual, sacred lives. Each oak and each poplar was not just a residence for a spirit, but a person with a fate as specific and precarious as any mortal's. This reverence for the individual tree naturally expanded to the entire grove. A sacred grove was not merely a pretty collection of trees. It was a temple built by nature itself, a living cathedral where the divine presence of the Dryads was concentrated and palpable. Stepping into one of these ancient woodlands was like crossing a threshold into another world, a place where the air itself hummed with a quiet, watchful power. The Greeks dedicated these groves to their gods, most often to Artemis, the virgin goddess of the wild, or to Pan, the god of the untamed wilderness. But the true residents, the beating heart of these sanctuaries, were the Dryads. The most sacred of these groves were often centered around the mightiest of trees, the primordial oaks, whose gnarled branches seemed to hold the secrets of the ages. An oak tree, with its deep roots and long life, was considered the most noble home for a Dryad, a being of immense patience and stability. But other trees held their own spirits too. Towering poplars, whispering pines, and even the graceful willows bending over quiet pools could each harbor a conscious, divine life. Why were these places so fiercely protected? Because every tree was a vessel for a soul. To harm a single sapling in a sacred grove was not an act of lumber harvesting. It was an act of sacrilege, a violation of a holy space as severe as defiling a stone temple. The taboos against desecration were absolute. You could not break a branch for kindling. You could not carve your name into the bark. You certainly could not bring an axe into the grove with the intent to fell a tree. To do so was to invite a curse of unimaginable scale. The wrath would not come from a distant god on a mountain, but from the very land you stood upon. The Dryads themselves, in their collective grief and anger, could bring blight upon your family, madness to your mind, or ensure your ventures in the natural world met with constant, mysterious failure. The forest itself would become your enemy. This belief created a powerful form of ecological conservation rooted in pure spiritual awe. People protected the groves not just because they were useful, but because they were alive with consciousness. Every rustle of leaves was a message, and every shadow held a watching eye. To stand in a sacred grove was to understand that you were a guest in a community of ancient, rooted beings, and your survival depended on showing the proper respect. What would our world look like if we still saw our forests through that lens today? But where does such a being begin her life? The origins of a dryad are as mysterious as the deep forest, woven from several threads of myth. One of the most ancient beliefs is that they simply emerge with the tree itself. A sacred acorn, touched by the blessing of a god, or fallen upon particularly hallowed ground, would sprout. As the first green shoot pushed through the soil, the consciousness of the dryad would awaken within it. Her life and the tree's life started in that very same instant, two expressions of a single, newborn soul. There was no separation, no before or after. The tree did not grow and then receive a spirit. The spirit was the tree, and the tree was the spirit, from the very first moment. This idea paints the dryad as a truly primordial force, a natural and spontaneous emanation of the earth's own life force, yet other stories grant them a more familial, divine lineage. Some myths speak of them as the daughters of Zeus, the king of the gods, perhaps born from his union with the ancient earth. Others trace their ancestry to the rustic gods, the Potamoi, who are the spirits of rivers, or even to Gaia, the Earth Mother herself. This dual origin is profoundly revealing. It tells us that the Greeks saw the Dryads as both elemental and divine. They were as fundamental as a sprouting seed, yet they also possessed a noble pedigree that connected them directly to the highest powers of the cosmos. They were not random sprites, but conscious, willful beings whose roots, both literal and metaphorical, ran deep into the very fabric of creation. Their birth, whether from a single acorn or from the loins of a god, was always a sacred event, marking the arrival of a new, watchful guardian for the ever-growing woodland world. A gentle rustle in the leaves might be the only sign of a shy dryad withdrawing from a stranger's approach. These spirits were often depicted as timid maidens, their forms flickering at the edge of vision, more a feeling of being watched than a clear figure. They embodied the quiet, hidden parts of the forest, preferring the company of birds and other nymphs to the loud, unpredictable presence of mortals. Their reclusive nature was not born of malice, but of a deep, instinctual caution. Humans, with their axes and their fires, represented the single greatest threat to their very existence. To be seen was to be vulnerable, so they became masters of subtlety, their laughter echoing just beyond the next thicket, their footprints vanishing among the ferns. This was the default state for many Dryads, a life of quiet observation from the safety of their rooted homes. Yet this gentle nature had a fierce and terrifying flip side. When their tree, the very core of their being, was threatened, the shy maiden vanished, replaced by a vengeful protector of raw, elemental power. The story of the nymph Atlantea and her sister Phoebe, sometimes linked to the Hamadryads, captures this duality perfectly. They were known as gentle spirits of the countryside, yet when pursued by unwanted suitors, they called upon their mother, the earth goddess Gaia, who transformed them into trees to ensure their safety. This act shows their core desire for peace, but also the fierce will to survive, even if it meant sacrificing their mobile forms forever. A more direct example of their protective wrath comes from the myth of Esoteric, a king who dared to violate a sacred grove of Demeter. He commanded his servants to fell a giant, ancient oak, a tree that was home to a powerful Dryad. Ignoring her pleas and the ominous blood that flowed from the wounded bark, he chopped the tree down, murdering the nymph within. For this act of sacrilege, the goddess Demeter herself cursed him with an insatiable, eternal hunger. He sold all his possessions and finally sold himself into slavery, consumed from the inside by a void he could never fill. This was the Dryad's vengeance, channeled through a greater deity. It was a curse that twisted a man's most basic need into a weapon of self-destruction, a stark warning of the consequences of harming a living, divine being. So the Dryad's personality was a direct reflection of her circumstances. In times of peace, she was the soul of the forest's gentle beauty. In times of threat, she became the embodiment of its untamable, righteous fury. The same spirit who might shyly offer shade to a weary traveler would not hesitate to unravel the life of the one who raised an axe against her home. The forest holds many tales of love and loss, but few are as haunting as that of Echo. While not a Dryad bound to a single tree, she was a nymph of the mountains, a being of voice and sound, whose story perfectly mirrors the themes of connection and vulnerability we have explored. Her tragedy began not with an axe, but with a broken heart. The great god Pan, ruler of the wild places, once fell in love with her, but Echo, a spirit of independent will, rejected his advances. In his fury at being refused, Pan drove the local shepherds into a mad frenzy. They became so enraged that they tore Echo limb from limb, scattering her pieces across the earth. Yet Gaia, the Earth Mother, absorbed the fragments of the nymph, preserving her voice. But this was not her restoration. It was a transformation into a living curse. Echo could no longer speak her own thoughts or initiate a conversation. She was condemned only to repeat the last few words spoken by others, a prisoner of sound, forever losing her own voice in the process. This cruel fate reflects a profound fear, the terror of being unable to express one's own self, to be reduced to a mere reflection of others. Her story does not end with Pan, however. It deepens with a love of her own. The cursed Echo wandered the woods until she saw the beautiful youth Narcissus, and she fell in love instantly. But how could she, who had no voice of her own, possibly declare her feelings? She could only follow him, hoping he would speak words she could send back to him. When Narcissus, separated from his hunting companions, called out, "Is anyone here?" Echo could only reply, "Here," he shouted, "Come," and she answered, "Come." She rushed from the trees, eager to embrace him, but he pushed her away in disgust, shouting that he would rather die than let her have him. Her only reply was a sorrowful, "Have him." Heartbroken, Echo faded away into the cliffs and caves, until only her voice remained, a sound without a body. Her curse became her entire identity, a perpetual echo of the words of others, a being defined entirely by the desires and statements she could not herself create. This myth is a powerful parallel to the silent suffering of the Dryads. Just as a Dryad's life is inextricably tied to her tree, Echo's existence was tied to the voices of others. Just as a felled tree silences its spirit forever, Echo's rejection and curse stripped her of her own agency, leaving only a hollow resonance. Her tale is a cautionary one about the consequences of cruel rejection. and the profound loss that comes from being denied one's own voice, a fate as tragic as the physical death of a Hamadryad in her oak. One myth captures this struggle for autonomy more than any other: the story of Daphne. She was a nymph, a lover of the wild forests, dedicated to a life of independence like the goddess Artemis. Her freedom was her most precious possession, and she roamed the untamed valleys, utterly content in her solitude. But her grace and beauty did not go unnoticed. The god Apollo, radiant and powerful, was struck by a golden arrow of Eros, the god of love, and he fell into an instant, burning passion for her. Yet this was no gentle romance. For at the same moment, Eros shot a second arrow, one of lead, directly into Daphne's heart. This arrow filled her with a cold, absolute revulsion for the very idea of love and marriage. So when Apollo began his pursuit, it was not a courtship, it was a hunt. He chased her through the woods, his divine speed making escape seem impossible. As his breath drew closer and she felt her strength failing, Daphne did the only thing she could to preserve her own self. She stretched her arms toward the river, her father, the god Peneus, and cried out in desperation. She begged him to change her form, to destroy the beauty that had caused this terrible pursuit. In that moment of ultimate need, her plea was answered. A heavy numbness seized her limbs. Her soft skin hardened into rough bark, her hair lengthened into leaves, and her feet became roots digging deep into the earth. Where the nymph Daphne had stood, a beautiful laurel tree now grew, its branches trembling in the wake of her transformation. Apollo arrived to embrace the woman he desired, but all he could hold was the trunk of the new tree. The myth tells us he could still hear her heart beating within the wood. This was not a happy ending. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a final, permanent assertion of control over her own body and destiny. She chose rooted silence over a freedom she could no longer possess. Apollo, in his grief and reverence, declared the laurel tree sacred to him forever, weaving its leaves into a crown for champions and poets. Yet this honor rings with a deep and troubling irony. The very symbol of victory and artistic achievement was born from a nymph's ultimate defeat, from her violent loss of self to escape a more violent possession. Daphne's story is the ultimate allegory for the violation of the natural world by an unchecked, possessive force. She represents every tree, every stream, every wild place that is pursued, consumed, or altered for another's purpose. Her transformation is not a magical wonder, but a tragic necessity. She becomes her own sanctuary, finding a terrible safety by merging completely with the nature she has always loved. In becoming a tree, she finally achieves the inviolable autonomy she craved, but at the cost of everything she was. The laurel wreath may crown the victor, but its leaves still whisper the name of the one who had to vanish to survive. These ancient spirits were not confined to isolated myths. They also moved through the grandest epics of the Greek world. In the saga of the Argonautica, the story of Jason and his quest for the Golden Fleece, the Dryads are a constant, whispering presence in the background. They do not often step onto the stage as named characters with speaking roles. Instead, they form the living soul of the wilderness through which the heroes must pass. When the Argo sails past a dense, unexplored coastline, the dark forest lining the shore is not merely scenery. It is the domain of the Dryads. Their unseen eyes watch the ship from the shadows of the trees, their collective spirit defining the very nature of the unknown lands the Argonauts must brave. They are the wilderness itself given a conscious, watching presence. This role is crucial. The heroes are not just navigating geographical obstacles. They are moving through a world that is alive and sentient. Every strange wood they enter is inhabited. Every grove they pass might hold a power that could be either benevolent or wrathful. The Dryads represent the ancient, rooted order of the world, an order that does not care for human glory or quests. They are a reminder that the heroes are temporary visitors in an infinitely older, more stable realm of divine life. In this way, the Dryads act as a narrative device, heightening the sense of wonder and danger. The deep forest is not just dark, it is watchful. The rustling leaves are not just the wind, they are the murmurs of its native spirits. The epic does not need to show us a Dryad dancing to make us feel her power. It is enough to know she is there, that the tree you might lean against for rest is the body of a goddess. This transforms the entire journey from a simple adventure into a passage through a sacred, and often perilous, landscape. Beyond the Argonautica, this pattern holds true. In other tales, when a weary hero finds sanctuary in a secluded grove, it is the local Dryads who offer that rest, their gentle presence providing a momentary haven from a violent world. They are the helpers who do not seek credit, the background divinities whose quiet power maintains the balance of the natural world against the chaos of human ambition. Their role in these stories is to anchor the epic to the earth, to remind us that even the greatest heroes are small beneath the ancient, leafy boughs of a world that was divine long before they arrived. Their gentle rustling could hide a terrifying purpose. While many Dryads preferred quiet observation, their wrath, once awakened, was a raw and unforgiving force of nature. The myth of Esoteric offers the most chilling example of this divine vengeance. He was a king who saw the forest not as a sacred space, but as a resource to be plundered. Ignoring all taboos, he led his servants into a grove sacred to the goddess Demeter, pointing his axe at a colossal, ancient oak. This was no ordinary tree. It was the home of a powerful Dryad, and as the first blow landed, a voice from within the trunk cried out in warning. The men hesitated, but Esoteric, consumed by arrogance, snatched the axe himself. He struck the trunk again and again, and from the gash in the bark, dark blood began to flow, a horrifying sign of the living spirit within. He did not stop until the great tree crashed to the ground, silencing the nymph forever. For this act of murder and sacrilege, Demeter placed a curse upon him, one that perfectly mirrored his crime. He was afflicted with an insatiable hunger, a bottomless void that no amount of food could ever fill. He consumed his entire fortune, selling his possessions and even his own daughter into slavery to buy more meals. In the end, he was left with nothing, devouring his own body in a futile attempt to satisfy the hunger. The Dryad's death was avenged not by a swift strike, but by a curse that turned the violator's own nature against him, consuming him from the inside out. This was not an isolated tale. Other legends speak of mortals who casually broke a branch for firewood, only to be pursued by whispers in the night that slowly unraveled their sanity. A farmer who cleared a grove for his fields might find his land struck by a mysterious blight, his crops withering as if the very soil mourned the lost trees. The Dryads did not need to wield weapons. Their power was the power of the ecosystem itself. They could twist the natural order they embodied into a tool of punishment, ensuring that an offense against one tree became a curse upon the entire life of the offender. This fearsome aspect served as the ultimate enforcement of respect. It taught that the forest was not a passive collection of objects, but a collective, conscious entity. To harm it was to invite a retaliation that was as patient, as deep-rooted, and as inevitable as the growth of the trees themselves. But the quiet world of the Dryads was not the only spirit realm in the forest. Sharing the same shadowed glades were their male counterparts, the satyrs, and their relationship was a source of constant tension. Where the Dryads were the soul of rooted, patient life, the satyrs were the embodiment of untamed impulse. These spirits were a chaotic blend of man and beast, with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a goat, complete with hooves, tails, and often horns curling from their wild hair. They were the companions of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, and they lived for music, dance and reckless pursuit. Their energy was the frantic, joyful, and sometimes frightening pulse of the wilderness. While a dryad represented the deep, silent consciousness of a single tree, a satyr was the sudden, loud rustle in the bushes, the fleeting glimpse of motion, the unpredictable force of nature in its most primal and restless form. This fundamental difference in their very essence set the stage for a relationship defined not by harmony, but by a dangerous dance of desire. The satyrs were infamous for their lustful appetites, and the beautiful, often solitary dryads were frequent objects of their unwanted attention. The forest, therefore, became a stage for a recurring drama, a chase between the rooted, feminine spirit of the tree and the roaming, masculine spirit of the wild. These were not stories of romance, but myths that explored the raw, often predatory dynamics between different forms of natural power. A dryad's life was one of stability and profound connection. A satyr's life was one of motion and momentary pleasure. When these two forces collided, the result was rarely a happy union. It was a pursuit, a violation of the sanctuary the tree spirit represented. The myths of satyrs chasing nymphs are not playful romps. They are stark illustrations of the threat that chaotic, possessive desire poses to a being whose entire existence is defined by its sacred, stationary home. The shy dryad, peeking from behind her bark, embodied a vulnerability that the free roaming satyr could so easily exploit. Her strength was in her deep, patient connection to the earth. His was in his mobility, his suddenness, his relentless energy. This created a power imbalance that the Greeks understood intimately, a reflection of the real-world tension between the settled, cultivated space and the unpredictable, dangerous wilds that constantly pressed in upon it. The chase of a nymph by a satyr was more than just a story. It was a mythic expression of the fear that the fragile, sacred order of the grove could be shattered at any moment by a force of pure, untamable instinct. These ancient tensions and tales were not just spoken, they were painted and carved into permanence. The silent world of Greek art gives us our most direct window into how the Dryads were truly seen. Walk through any museum housing ancient pottery, and you will find them. They appear most often on vases, graceful figures painted in black or red against the clay. The artists captured them in moments of both peace and peril. A common motif shows a nymph, her body fluid and graceful, peeking out from behind the trunk of her tree. Only half of her form is visible, one eye watching the viewer, a hand resting gently on the bark. This is not a spirit hiding in fear, but one who is literally emerging from her home. The tree is not just behind her, it is a part of her space, her shield and her identity merged into one scene. In other depictions, we see them dancing. A group of dryads might hold hands, forming a circle around a particularly sacred oak, their flowing robes and loose hair suggesting a ritual of celebration, a tribute to the life of the forest. These dances are not the frantic revels of the satyrs, but something more measured, more rooted, a joyful expression of their collective spirit. But the most powerful artistic choice reveals the core of their mythic nature, the semi-fused form. Some sculptures and reliefs show a nymph whose lower body subtly transforms into the trunk of the tree itself. Her human torso rises from the bark, her legs lost within the wood, a permanent and beautiful hybrid. This visual metaphor is genius. It communicates the dryad's essence instantly, without a single written word. She is not standing next to the tree, she is growing from it. Her life and the tree's life are physically, inextricably one. This artistic decision, repeated across centuries, cemented the modern image of the tree spirit. When we imagine a dryad today, we likely picture this very form, a woman whose body becomes bark and branch, an idea born directly from the chisels and brushes of ancient Greek artisans. These depictions did more than just illustrate stories. They shaped a spiritual understanding. To see a dryad half emerged from an oak on a wine vessel was a daily reminder that the natural world was alive with conscious, divine presence. It made the mythical tangible, transforming every real tree into a potential vessel for a being just as beautiful, just as watchful as the one on the pottery. The art was a bridge, telling people not just what to believe, but what to see when they looked into the heart of the forest. The rustling of leaves in a sacred grove was never just the wind. It was a language. The Greeks believed that the Dryads, in their timeless union with the trees, possessed a deep, murmuring wisdom, a connection to the hidden currents of fate that they could share with those who knew how to listen. This was not the formal prophecy of a temple oracle shrouded in incense, but something older and more organic. A Dryad's knowledge came from the earth itself, from the slow, patient awareness of roots that touched underground streams, and from a life that spanned centuries. She witnessed the patterns of the seasons, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the recurring follies of mortals, all from her fixed and silent post. This vast perspective gave her a form of foresight. If a hero, lost and desperate, stumbled into her grove and made the proper offerings, he might not receive a clear verse. Instead, he would stand quietly beneath her branches, listening. The way the leaves shuddered in a sudden, windless moment, the specific creak of a branch, or the pattern of shadows cast upon the moss could all be interpreted as signs. It was a conversation with the forest itself, and the Dryad was its voice. Her guidance was subtle, a nudge in the right direction, a warning of a path best left untaken, or a confirmation that he was on the right trail. She did not speak in plain words, but in the poetry of nature, a code that only the reverent and the perceptive could hope to decipher. This made her a different kind of seer, one whose power was inextricably linked to the health and sanctity of her home. A dryad in a thriving ancient wood was a clear channel for this wisdom, but a spirit in a damaged or disrespected forest would fall silent, her connection to the cosmic flow severed by the violence done to her body and her world. To seek a prophecy from a dryad was therefore to acknowledge the sacredness of her tree, to approach not as a master demanding answers, but as a humble guest seeking counsel from an elder. Have you ever walked in a quiet wood and felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of clarity, as if the air itself had just offered you a solution? That fleeting feeling might be the last, faint echo of this ancient belief, the ghost of a time when the world was full of voices waiting to guide us. This reverence for the prophetic whispers of the grove translated directly into daily acts of devotion. For the average Greek farmer or family, honoring the Dryads was not a grand ceremony reserved for priests, but a simple, intimate part of life. It was a relationship built on respect and a quiet understanding of mutual need. You would not build a massive stone temple for a spirit whose very essence was the living wood. Instead, worship happened at the source, at the foot of a great ancient tree on the edge of your land. Many households maintained a small, informal shrine there. This might be nothing more than a flat stone placed amongst the roots, or a tiny niche carved into the soft bark itself, where simple offerings could be left. The gifts were always humble and symbolic of purity and nourishment. A family might pour a libation of fresh milk onto the roots, a gesture of sharing their own sustenance. They would leave a small clay dish of golden honey, a sweet tribute to the spirit within. Sometimes they would tie a simple strip of colored wool to a low branch, a visible, personal prayer left to flutter in the breeze. These were not bribes for grand favors. They were acts of neighborly goodwill, a way of saying, "We see you, we respect you. Please continue to watch over this place." The prayers spoken were equally direct. A farmer might ask the local dryad to protect his orchard from a blight, or to ensure the health of the nearby grove that provided him with shade and firewood. A young woman might whisper a request for the nymph's blessing on her marriage, seeing in the strong, fertile tree a symbol of the life she hoped to build. This worship was deeply practical, rooted in the understanding that the well-being of the human community was tied to the health of the natural spirits around it. If you cared for the Dryad's tree, she would, in turn, care for you. This created a powerful, decentralized form of spirituality where every individual could be a priest in their own right, maintaining the sacred bond between their home and the ancient, watching soul of the land. That deep, instinctual reverence for a living tree was not unique to the sun-drenched hills of Greece. Cultures across the world, separated by vast oceans and mountain ranges, listened to the same whispering leaves and came to a remarkably similar conclusion. The forest is alive with conscious guardians. In the mist-shrouded cedar forests of Japan, the Kodama hold a sacred place. These spirits are said to inhabit trees that are particularly ancient or distinctive, and to harm one is to invite a terrible curse upon oneself and one's village. Unlike the Dryad, who is often visualized as a beautiful woman fused with her oak, the Kodama are more elusive. They are rarely seen, but their presence is announced by the echoing sounds in the deep mountains. A distant falling tree, a sudden crack in the silence, or a sound that returns to you moments later. These are the voices of the Kodama. They are so deeply tied to their individual tree that a special sacred rope, called a shaimnawa, is often tied around the trunk to mark its divine residence and warn people away. The parallel is profound. Just as the Greeks saw a Dryad's life extinguished with her tree, the Japanese believed that felling a Kodama's tree would bring disaster, blight, and death to the lumberjack and his community. It is the same core truth expressed through a different cultural lens. The tree is not an object, it is a person. Venture into the vast, primeval taiga of Slavic lands, and you would encounter a different kind of woodland sovereign, the Leshy. This spirit is far more formidable and wild than the typically shy Dryad. The Leshy is a master of the entire forest, a shape-shifting giant who could appear as a towering man, a wolf, or even a talking mushroom. He is not bound to one tree, but is the animate soul of the whole woodland, its guardian and absolute ruler. While a Dryad might weep if her single oak was harmed, a Leshy would actively defend his domain. He was known to lead trespassers astray, making them lost for days with his magical control over paths and shadows. He could mimic the voices of loved ones to lure people deeper into the woods. Yet, like the Dryads, he was not purely malevolent. He protected the animals within his realm and could be benevolent to those who showed respect, leaving offerings or asking for permission before hunting or foraging. The Leshy represents a different scale of the same belief. The forest itself is a single, powerful, conscious entity that demands acknowledgement. Even within the broader family of Indo-European myths from which the Greeks emerged, we find close cousins to the Dryads. The Alsates, for instance, were nymphs of the sacred groves, their name surviving in fragments of other traditions, always tied to hallowed woodland spaces. This pattern, from the specific Dryad to the territorial Leshy to the echoing Kodama, points to a universal human experience. Before the rise of cities and industry, humanity lived in constant dialogue with the wild. The ancient, towering tree was a mystery. It lived far longer than any human. Its roots touched deep, unseen worlds, and its branches reached for the heavens. It was only natural to perceive within it a spirit, a consciousness that mirrored our own, yet was profoundly, majestically other. This was not a coordinated global religion, but a spontaneous, shared awakening to the sentience of the natural world. The Dryad, the Kodama, and the Leshy are all answers to the same haunting question: what watches us from the quiet heart of the woods? The whispering leaves of the Dryad's oak contain a deeper resonance, one that would captivate the great philosophical minds of the ancient world. Long after the age of myth, Stoic thinkers looked upon the natural world and saw a perfect, rational order, a single living being they called the cosmos. Within this system, the Dryad was not merely a charming story. She became a powerful symbol for the Logos, the divine reason that permeates all things. Just as the Dryad's life is inseparable from her tree, the Stoics believed that every rock, river, and star is animated by this same universal spirit. The Dryad, in her perfect unity with the oak, was a living metaphor for the ideal state of being. She represented a soul in complete harmony with its assigned place in nature, accepting its fate without resistance. A human, according to the Stoics, should aspire to this rooted acceptance, to live in accordance with nature's rational plan, just as the Dryad lives through every season of her tree. Her existence was a lesson in resilience and purpose, a silent testament to the beauty of a life fully integrated with the world soul. This philosophical adoption transformed the nymph from a local deity into a universal emblem, her bond with the tree reflecting the sacred bond between the individual human soul and the vast, intelligent universe. But another school of thought would take this idea even further into the realm of the mystical. The Neoplatonists, building on the ideas of Plato, envisioned a universe overflowing from a single, ineffable source they called the One. From this ultimate reality emanated a series of divine levels, including the world soul, or anima mundi. This world soul was the great, breathing consciousness that gives life and order to the entire material cosmos. And where did the Dryads fit into this grand metaphysical scheme? For a Neoplatonist like Plotinus, the Dryad was a beautiful, tangible manifestation of this very world soul. She was not an isolated spirit, but a localized expression of the universal life force, a single note in the symphony of existence. Her spirit infused the matter of the tree, proving that the divine was not distant and abstract, but intimately present within the bark and leaves. The tree itself was not dead matter waiting for a spirit to inhabit it. Instead, the world soul was actively expressing itself as the tree, with the Dryad as its visible personality. This idea resolved a profound philosophical question. How can the perfect, spiritual one create a seemingly imperfect material world? The Dryad, in her beautiful fusion of spirit and wood, was the answer. She demonstrated that the material world is not separate from the divine, but is its direct expression, its beautiful and sacred body. To walk through a grove was to walk through the thoughts of the world soul, each tree a unique idea made manifest. Can you hear the echo of that belief in the quiet awe you feel standing in an ancient forest? It is the lingering sense that you are not just in nature, but in the presence of a conscious, dreaming mind, a mind that still speaks through the rooted forms of its countless Dryad daughters. A profound shift was stirring in the human soul as the 19th century dawned. Amidst the choking smog of the Industrial Revolution and the rigid logic of the Enlightenment, a new generation of artists and poets turned away from factories and reason, seeking refuge in the wild, untamed heart of nature. In this great romantic reawakening, the ancient Dryad found a powerful new voice. She was no longer just a figure from dusty mythology. She became the ultimate symbol of sublime beauty and the world's fading wildness. The Romantics saw in her the very essence of everything that modern industrial society was destroying, a spirit of pure, unspoiled life. The poet John Keats, in his masterpiece Endymion, captured this longing perfectly. He did not write of the Dryad as a distant character in an old tale, but as a living presence that the modern world had forgotten. His verses are a desperate plea to reconnect with that lost magic. He laments a world grown too weary and cynical to see the nymphs peeking from the trees, writing of a time when every leaf and stream was felt to be divine. For Keats, the Dryad was not a superstition. She was a truth of the heart, a reminder of a more passionate, more alive way of being that civilization had trampled underfoot. Her rooted existence represented a stability and a deep, organic connection that the rapidly changing world desperately lacked. This artistic resurrection was not confined to poetry. Painters like John William Waterhouse brought the Dryads back to vivid, breathtaking life on canvas. In his work, the tree spirits are not shy, fleeting figures. They are tangible, luminous beings, often depicted with a haunting melancholy. You can see it in their eyes, a deep, sorrowful knowledge as they cling to their trees, as if aware they are the last guardians of a vanishing world. Waterhouse's brushstrokes immortalize them at the very moment the axe of industry was poised to fall, making them icons of a beauty that must be protected. The Romantics did not just retell the old myths, they reinvented the Dryad for a new age. They transformed her from a local Greek deity into a universal emblem of nature's soul. In their hands, her story was no longer about the wrath of gods or the follies of heroes. It was a poignant, urgent cry to remember that the forest has a spirit, a voice that speaks to those who will listen before the last sacred grove is silenced forever. The Dryad's whisper did not fade with the marble of antiquity. It finds its voice once more in the quiet, determined practices of modern spiritual seekers. Across the world, contemporary pagans, Wiccans, and Neo-Druids are resurrecting the ancient bond with tree spirits, not as superstition, but as a living, breathing eco-spirituality. For them, the Dryad is not a character in a book, but a present consciousness in the old oak at the edge of the park, or the ancient redwood standing in a protected grove. This is not about recreating the past with perfect accuracy, but about listening for that same sacred presence the Greeks felt, and responding to it with reverence that is urgently needed in our time. The core of this modern practice is a simple, profound act, tree meditation. A practitioner will approach a tree with respect, often placing a hand upon its bark and quietly asking permission to connect. They then sit at its base, quiet their mind, and simply listen. They are not waiting for a voice in words, but for a feeling, a transfer of energy, a sense of the tree's immense, slow-paced life. It is an attempt to bridge the gap between human frenzy and arboreal patience, to feel for a moment what it is to be rooted, resilient, and deeply calm. This meditation is a form of communion, a way to honor the Dryad by acknowledging her existence and learning the wisdom she offers: stability, interconnectedness, and silent strength. This personal reverence naturally expands into a collective ethic. In Neo-Druidic traditions, gatherings often take place in sacred groves, where rituals honor the spirits of the land and the specific trees that form their temple. Offerings are made not of milk and honey, but of song, poetry, and pledges of protection. The Dryad is invited as a witness and a guide. This spiritual connection then fuels a powerful and essential form of modern worship, environmental activism. For these communities, to chain oneself to an ancient tree threatened by loggers is a prayer in action. Organizing a protest to preserve a local woodland is a ritual of defense. Donating to reforestation projects is an offering to the global family of tree spirits. They see the defense of the forest as the direct, logical extension of honoring the Dryad. If her life is the tree, then saving the tree is saving her life, just as the old myths warned. The chainsaw is the modern embodiment of Urasiththan's axe, and the activist standing in its way is channeling the Dryad's ancient, protective wrath. This transforms activism from a political stance into a sacred duty, a deep, spiritual response to a world in ecological crisis. The myth has become a mandate, and the whispered plea of the nymph is now answered with the fierce, loving action of those who still hear her. That ancient whisper from the sacred grove has not been silenced by time. It has simply found new channels, migrating from crumbling temples and epic poems into the vibrant worlds of modern pop culture. The Dryad has been reborn in our collective imagination, her form reshaped by animation studios and game designers who have given her a new voice for a new era. Perhaps her most famous modern incarnation comes from Disney's animated film Hercules. There, she appears not as a solitary, timid nymph, but as a chorus of 5 beautiful, sassy tree spirits who serve as the muses for the story itself. They are vibrant, confident, and full of life, narrating the epic with soulful gospel music and sharp wit. This portrayal is a radical departure from the vulnerable, rooted spirits of myth. The Disney Dryads are powerful, mobile, and utterly in control of their narrative. They are benevolent, charming, and far removed from the terrifying vengeance of their ancient counterparts. This interpretation makes the concept of a nature spirit accessible and friendly, sanding away the rough edges of mortal danger and divine wrath to create a character that fits a family-friendly adventure. Yet in doing so, it also softens the core truth of the original myth, the profound life or death interdependence between the spirit and her tree. You will not find a Hamadryad facing execution here, only delightful singers moving the plot along. This is the Dryad as entertainer, a beloved figure stripped of her ecological peril. But another realm has embraced that peril and woven it directly into the mechanics of adventure. Open the Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons, and you will find the Dryad presented with a game designer's precision. She is a creature of the Feywild, a chaotic and magical parallel dimension, categorized for players as a type of monster or potential ally. The game statistics codify her classic traits into rules. She has a powerful ability called Tree Stride, allowing her to magically step from one tree to another, a clever gameplay interpretation of her deep connection to the forest. She can also cast spells like Entangle and speak with plants, making her a potent guardian of her domain. Most tellingly, the game often presents her as a potential quest giver or obstacle. Adventurers might be tasked by a Dryad to save her tree from a blight or a greedy lumber consortium, directly mirroring the ancient myths of Ura-Sitztha. Or if the players themselves act as despoilers, she becomes a deadly enemy, using the forest itself as her weapon. Dungeons & Dragons takes the mythological essence and makes it interactive, transforming the Dryad's tragic vulnerability into a set of strategic challenges and rewards. She is no longer a symbol to be contemplated, but a force to be reckoned with, bargained with, or fought. This portrayal reinforces her role as a guardian, but frames it within the logic of a game, where nature is often a dungeon to be explored or a resource to be managed. These two portrayals, the singing Disney muse and the stat-blocked D&D guardian, represent the two poles of the modern Dryad. In one, she is a benign, disembodied spirit of nature's beauty. In the other, she is a concrete, mechanical entity with defined powers and weaknesses. Both have been incredibly influential, introducing millions to the concept of a tree spirit. Yet both, in their own ways, risk reducing her to an archetype. The Disney version risks making her too safe. The Dungeons & Dragons version risks making her just another entry in a catalog of fantasy beings. They can obscure the raw, philosophical power of the original concept, that terrifying and beautiful idea that a single tree is not a resource, but a living soul, and that the death of a forest is not an economic loss, but a silent, screaming genocide of divine beings. Our modern myths are fun and engaging, but do they still carry the weight of that sacred warning? When we see a Dryad in a game or a movie, are we reminded of the real, ancient oaks outside our window? Or has she become just another fantasy creature, forever separated from the soil from which she first grew? Could the ancient belief in Dryads be a deep, forgotten memory of something real? Science may not offer us nymphs dancing in the glades, but it does provide fascinating ways to understand why humanity has so persistently seen souls in the trees. Consider the concept of biophilia, a term coined by biologist E.O. Wilson. This is the hypothesis that humans possess an innate, genetically programmed affinity for the natural world. Our ancestors evolved in wild landscapes, and our survival depended on reading the subtle signs of the forest, the patterns of animals, and the health of plants. This deep, ancient connection is still wired into our brains. That profound sense of peace you feel walking through a quiet wood, that instinct to reach out and touch the bark of an old tree, could be a modern expression of biophilia. It is the echo of a time when recognizing the aliveness of the forest was not a spiritual practice, but a matter of life and death. The Dryad myth could be the poetic personification of this hardwired, biological urge to connect with and honor the living world around us. Then there is the curious trick of the mind known as pareidolia. This is our brain's tendency to perceive familiar patterns, especially faces, in random stimuli. We see the man in the moon, a face in the clouds, or the shape of a rabbit in a rock. Now, look at the bark of an old pine or the gnarled trunk of an oak. Is it so hard to see a wise, weathered face staring back? The knots and grooves naturally form eyes, a nose, a silent mouth. Pareidolia gave our ancestors the raw material. Biophilia gave them the reason to care. Together, they could easily transform a strangely shaped tree from a simple plant into a watching guardian, a dryad whose features were etched into the wood by time itself. But the most compelling scientific parallel lies not in our minds, but beneath our feet. Modern ecology has revealed that forests are not just collections of individual trees competing for sunlight. They are vast, interconnected communities, linked by a subterranean neural network of fungal threads called mycelium. Scientists have poetically named this the Wood Wide Web. Through this fungal internet, trees can communicate with each other. They send warning signals about insect attacks, share nutrients with sick or struggling neighbors, and even recognize their own offspring. A mother tree can use this network to nourish her seedlings growing in the deep shade. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable chemical reality. The forest behaves as a single, cooperative organism. Now, listen to that idea again. The forest is a single, cooperative organism, its individual members connected by an invisible web of communication and mutual support. Does that not sound hauntingly familiar? It is the literal, scientific validation of the ancient Greek belief. The Dryads were never just individual spirits. They were the local consciousness of a collective being. The Wood Wide Web is the physical, biological substrate for the world soul the Neoplatonists called the anima mundi. The myth sensed the connection, and science is now mapping its very pathways. So were the Greeks right. In a way, they were more right than they could have possibly known. They may not have had the vocabulary of mycology or evolutionary psychology, but they perceived the truth of the forest's deep, intertwined life. The Dryad is the name we give to that feeling of sentient connection, a beautiful story woven from the threads of our own biology, our pattern-seeking minds, and the silent, miraculous conversations happening beneath the soil. Find a quiet moment and a tree you feel drawn to, perhaps in your local park or even your own backyard. Stand before it for a moment, taking in its full presence, the way the light filters through its leaves and the texture of its bark. Gently place your hand upon its trunk. Feel the solid, unyielding strength beneath your palm, the rough patterns carved by years of sun and rain. This is not just a surface, it is a living record. Now settle down at its base, your back resting against its support. Close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath. With each exhale, release the noise of your day, the mental lists, the constant hum of thought. Listen instead to the physical sounds around you. The rustle of leaves is not random noise. It is a language. The creak of a branch is not just wood straining. It is a voice. In your mind's eye, picture the world from the tree's perspective. Its reality is not one of movement, but of profound connection. Feel its roots reaching deep into the earth, drawing up water and minerals, a slow, steady sip of life from the soil. Sense the energy of the sun being absorbed by every leaf, a gentle warmth that fuels its patient growth. This is a life measured in seasons, not seconds. Now imagine that this steady, pulsing life force has a consciousness, not a human mind with frantic thoughts, but a quiet, vast awareness. It is the awareness of the soil's composition, the path of underground streams, the weight of a nesting bird, the pattern of the stars that wheel overhead at night. This is the spirit of the tree. Do not strain to hear words. Instead, open yourself to the feeling of its presence. You might sense a deep, grounding calm, a stability that has weathered countless storms. You might feel a simple, wordless welcome, an acknowledgement of your shared space in this moment. Perhaps a memory will surface in your own mind, a flash of a childhood tree you once climbed, a feeling of safety and wonder. That is the connection being made. Sit with this feeling for as long as it feels natural. When you are ready, take one more deep breath, feeling the solid support of the tree at your back. Open your eyes slowly. The world might look a little different, the green of the leaves a bit more vivid, the air a little sweeter. You have not just been sitting against a tree. You have been sharing a moment with a being whose life is a testament to resilience and silent strength. This simple act is an echo of the ancient reverence for the Dryad, a personal invitation to listen for the soul within the wood. The rustle of an ancient redwood's leaves carries the same warning it did in the sacred groves of Greece. We no longer speak of Erisithan's axe, but the roar of the chainsaw echoes the same act of sacrilege. The myth of the Dryad was never just a story. It was a profound ecological principle wrapped in divine metaphor. A world that sees a tree as the home of a conscious spirit is a world that thinks twice before cutting it down. Today, that ancient wisdom has never been more critical. The relentless clearing of old growth forests and the loss of ancient trees worldwide is not merely an environmental statistic. It is the silent, simultaneous extinction of countless potential dryads. Each fallen giant represents a story cut short, a consciousness extinguished, a unique voice in the forest's chorus permanently silenced. We are living through a real-world repetition of the old tragedies, but on a scale the ancient Greeks could never have conceived. Where they feared for a single grove, we now face the unraveling of entire ecosystems. The Dryad's fate was tied to her individual tree, and our fate is now tied to the health of the global forest. This is the powerful, urgent parallel. The protection of our remaining ancient woodlands is the modern, tangible way we honor the spirit of the Dryad. It is a form of worship translated into direct action. When we fight to preserve a tract of primordial forest from development, we are not just saving trees. We are defending the temples of these spirits. We are ensuring that the ancient, murmuring wisdom held within those trunks is not lost forever. Supporting reforestation projects is not just about planting saplings. It is about welcoming new generations of these spirits into the world, giving them a chance to grow and watch over the earth for centuries to come. The environmental crisis is, at its heart, a spiritual crisis. It is a failure to see the world as alive and sacred. The myth of the Dryad challenges us to restore that vision, to look at a towering oak and see not just lumber, but a living, breathing entity with a right to exist. Her story gives the abstract concept of conservation a face, a name, and a heartbeat. Can we learn to listen to the forest's voice before the last whisper fades into memory? From the shy nymphs of ancient Greece to the universal symbol of nature's soul, the Dryads have journeyed through millennia to deliver their timeless message. They began as the quiet consciousness of sacred oaks, their lives a fragile balance of beauty and peril, their stories a warning against the arrogance of unchecked power. They evolved into philosophical muses for Stoics and Neoplatonists, who saw in their rooted existence a model for cosmic harmony. They were resurrected by romantic poets as a lament for a world losing its wild heart. And today, They inspire a modern eco-spirituality that sees their defense as a sacred duty. Across this entire epic, their core role has never changed. They are the eternal guardians of the natural world, and their fate is a mirror reflecting our own relationship with the living earth. To honor them is to protect the ancient forests, to listen to the wisdom of the wild, and to remember that we are part of a community of life, not its masters. The next time you find yourself walking through a quiet wood, pause for a moment. Listen closely to the rustle of the leaves above you. That soft, murmuring voice is more than just the wind. It is an invitation to remember and a plea to protect the sacred, silent life that has watched over this world since the very beginning.